koutou, ko James toko ingoa. Hey, I'm James, mi nome is James, and Lothamath, greetings in Scots Gaelic, the language of my ancestors from Scotland and Northern England, up in the Northern Hemisphere. I also want to acknowledge the indigenous custodians of this land we're on, as well as tangata whenua in Aotearoa. So I'm James, I'm a lecturer and PhD student in interaction and communication design at AUT, and I'm at the early stages of my PhD project, which is about multi-perspective convergence and transmedia storytelling, a practice-led exploration of interactive narratives. Yeah, it's all good. So the kind of context for my presentation is driven by personal experience as well as the context that we're living in internationally and in Aotearoa. So there's so many emerging and changing technologies, socio-cultural phenomena, including increasing polarization, as we've seen in Aotearoa recently with the divisive Treaties Principle Bill, and more recently here in Brazil as well with the current political situation over the past few years. So this has driven a lot of my work that I'm about to present on. As well as this, myself as a practitioner, I'd say I probably have some undiagnosed ADHD in some respect, so my divergent kind of thinking and exploration of many different medias and artistic forms has driven a lot of this research that I'm about to present on. So I'm a multidisciplinary creative practitioner, a photographer, filmmaker, musician, and UX and interaction designer. And I've kind of explored and been driven to investigate lots of different areas of creative practice. This led me to a Bachelor's of Design after high school at AUT, but in New Zealand we only have 3 years of study for these bachelor's programs, so it actually led me into a master's degree because I still had more questions, which I'm just going to show you a little bit of. We made a kelp forest experience for kids at the Godalming Marine Reserve to teach them about marine ecological literacy through a physical haptic experience. So there you can see a child taking a bit of plastic out of the kelp forest, putting it in a recycling bin, and then they had to draw their own fish and sea life to repopulate the kelp forest with. This was informed by a lot of artistic and embodied design principles, physical haptic experiences, but I still had many questions after I finished this degree, which has led me to where I am today. So my current PhD research question is, how might the creative use of multi-perspective transmedia storytelling and interactive media foster convergence? So I'll just unpack that a little bit. When we're talking here about multi-perspective, we're talking about multiple viewpoints around a particular topic. So that could be a viewpoint of a different political perspective, a different cultural perspective, a different life experience. And when we're talking about convergence, we're talking about the need to bring together to find a common ground or an overlap. Just due to our current context with algorithmically driven division, this idea of fostering convergence has become a core theme of what I'm trying to achieve through storytelling essentially and new media. So the context that I'm looking at, as mentioned before, polarization in society, transmedia storytelling, which I'm going to unpack in a second, as well as generative artificial intelligence, so 3 of the main kind of key contexts that I'm looking at, as well as a pahutakawa tree in the Parnell Rose Gardens as a site of inquiry. So a key context for this project is the increasing polarization in many societies being driven in part by technology, and this is evidenced around the world by the increasing division and disparity between political factions. Sorry guys, I'll just pause for a second. Context number 2, which is informing this project is Transmedia storytelling as defined by Henry Jenkins. So a media theorist, Henry Jenkins defines transmedia storytelling as narrating across multiple platforms where each medium adds unique elements to the overall story. This is also being informed by a current context where narratives are disseminated and told across multiple media channels nowadays, where a singular piece of work is really the only version, especially in contexts such as social media. And then finally, the main context that's informing some of my thinking is generative AI, and actually how generative AI is driving some of this division. So the rapid development of generative AI we're seeing with ChatGPT, Midjourney, etc. There's a lot of hype, which OpenAI would want you to believe in and buy into, but it's actually being used to worsen these issues of polarization. Just last week I was reading in The Guardian that generative AI was being used by far-right groups to drive anti-immigration and racist narratives, creating imagery to create propaganda for social media, as well as how these types of algorithms work to support the already privileged or the already oppressors, the people who are already oppressing and are in power. And then I guess what I'm exploring these contexts through, what's become the site of inquiry, is this Puhutakawa tree, which you can see me standing on in the Parnell Rose Gardens. It's a 180 to nearly 200-year-old Puhutakawa tree, which is an indigenous tree in coastal environments in Aotearoa, and it's seen as kind of New Zealand's national tree. Very deep significance for different groups, especially Māori, and it changes throughout the year and is known as the Christmas tree in New Zealand because of the red blossoming flowers which appear during December. So why this tree? You guys might be asking to explore these kind of deeper, more socio-political themes. I'm just going to explore in more detail now. So as with everyone here, I'm using a practice-led research approach, so I'm exploring these questions through making and through this metaphor of the Puhutakawa tree in Auckland. My first method and primary methods are lens-based media. So the idea of using cameras and camera technology to explore ideas around representation. So this is slightly different as a way of representing what exists in reality. I'm not using drawing or painting, which is adding more of an interpretive angle on what we're viewing. I'm actually using the lens to try and create a semi-realistic or less intervened image in the final outcome. My initial process, I was drawn to this tree, coming back to Auckland after living away for a few years and moving to Parnell, and then I'd never seen this Puhutakawa tree before, and I was drawn to this environment. Drawing on my master's degree previously in the embodied processes and sensory understanding, I used to develop the kelp forest. I looked to know this place and open up this space. It was a process of me, and I think others have talked about this over yesterday and today, of trying to sit with the environment and be allowed into the space. If the tree didn't want to be photographed or didn't want to be engaged with, I would just let that be. But it was a lot of time spent there, sometimes not actually capturing anything, but just experiencing it. When there were days where the lighting was good, or I saw that the tree was maybe speaking to me in a way that it wanted to be photographed, I would take that as consent, I guess, to capture some of these images. This image here are kind of textural explorations of the arterial roots and the bark textures on the Puhutakawa. I explored collage type effects to capture the size of this tree. It's absolutely enormous and kind of encompasses you into an almost cathedral-like space when you're in there. And I also explored drone and video as a way of understanding this place. Just let this play for a bit so you guys can get a sense of the size of this. And this is in an urban environment. It's inside central Auckland. And it is actually the site of a lot of division in itself, which has driven a lot of this thinking. There was plans to build a memorial for a terrible disaster that happened in New Zealand in the 1970s, the Erebus disaster, which divided community and opinion on the matter. Local residents thought it may harm the tree, as well as people such as Dame Naida Glavish, whereas others, such as the Ministry for Cultural Heritage, argued, and arborists that they employed argued that it wasn't going to harm the tree at all, but this created a lot of division, especially on social media. So it's kind of a context in itself which connects to some of those ideas and questions I've had recently. So this is a mixture of experiments I've been doing, archiving and collecting And what actually emerged from this process, as you can see here, was photogrammetry. Kind of uncanny in a way, hearing Joe's presentation around tree archiving. It kind of came to me naturally as a way that I potentially could explore this. And also looking at other forms of transmedia narratives that could support this idea of multi-perspectives on this side. So photogrammetry has emerged as a primary mode of representation of the tree. This was an early experiment just with free software online using my phone. And just to explain a little bit more about photogrammetry, it's the science of obtaining reliable information about physical objects and environments by recording, measuring, and interpreting photographic images to create a 3D mesh around the object. What I didn't know at the time, probably the hardest thing you can capture with photogrammetry are trees, because it's always moving, it's alive, it's growing, the wind moves a little bit. You don't have a static image that the algorithm can stitch together. So I've really jumped in at the deep end. I didn't start with something easy. It's been a big learning curve, but I think I'm getting there. I think my summer is going to be a lot of time spent at the tree capturing images. So using drones and using handheld cameras to capture different angles, I've taken, I think in the current mesh, I've got nearly 8,000 images, and there's more to be added. I'm going in a process of going closer to the tree with the camera, coming out, and then doing the same with a drone. Usually I'm there for about an hour to 2 hours at a time, really sitting with the tree if the timing is right, the weather is good, the tree wants to be photographed, and capturing details there. It's then run through the model and created into a data point cloud. This is then stitched together into a rudimentary mesh using 3ds Zephyr, which is the software that I'm currently using. As you can see though, in the upper reaches here, that's not capturing the leaves or any of the details in the upper reaches of the branches, so that's something that I'm trying to work through and thinking about. And this is where I'm currently up to with the render as of the week before we flew out. So trying to capture these details inside the location, and then I'm trying to use this as almost a site or as a stage for different narratives that could exist here. For example, this bench that you can see here has a plaque. It was dedicated to someone. I want to know who that person was, what's their story and connection to this place. I'd also love to talk to community members, ethics approval pending on that, to see how they feel about this place and how could their narratives be designed into something that can converge and foster a sense of connection despite having disparity of opinion. I'm studying, because the leaves are so difficult to capture with photogrammetry, I've ended up going for a handmade modeled approach based upon a particular Pūtekawa leaf replicated. There are some issues of representation here which I'm still thinking through. I don't quite have my rationale about why the tree itself would be photographic and then the leaves would be something that was 3D modeled. I guess this is also driving what I'm going to show you guys in a bit around the aesthetics that I'm going to be exploring. So this is currently where I'm up to with the photogrammetry model as of 2 weeks ago. So my second method that I'm exploring is actually narrative design, as I don't have ethics to talk to anyone or tell their stories or get their consent to co-design with them. I've actually been looking at writing my own little narratives and podcasts, drawing upon my experience of sound design and music to create different ways of understanding the site. So here's an example here of a script I wrote for a fictional podcast about John Campbell, who used to have a house where the tree was in Parnell. He's kind of known as the kind of godfather of Auckland, or one of the forefathers of Auckland in the Pākehā sense. And he used to have a house at the Parnell rose gardens, and there's some speculation that he actually planted the Pūtekawa tree back in the 1800s. So I've created a fictional narrative about him and his wife through research. I've explored ways in which I can record sound and create a sense of atmosphere, which I'll show you in a second. And I've actually put stuff up onto Spotify. I believe it's still up there, Te Ha, and it's kind of just the early initial exploration of how I can tell stories through audio. In addition to this, I'm also keeping a blog, which is kind of my own narrative and personal story throughout this process, documenting every visit that I make to the tree, breakthroughs, challenges, and kind of narrativizing my own methodology as I go through this experience. And this has led me to my final method, which is reflective making. I'll just let this play. I've started using rudimentary interactive software such as Spline to create kind of lo-fi web experiences to explore how I can embed and encompass lots of different narratives into a digital space. So using 360-degree photography and interactive kind of ways you can access more information, thinking about the branches of the tree, how they could potentially be these spiraling off or branching off literally narratives, but all centered around a particular site. Using kind of basic photogrammetry renders of the tree there to give scientific information. And then something I want to explore more of is the root system, and ways in which the tree is not just what you can see physically, but what's underneath the ground, what's above it, what's a bird's eye view look like, what is a spiritual understanding of this place as well as a scientific. If the audio works. I've been exploring different interactive audio narratives. This is that podcast reinterpreted into an old Victorian desk. Exploring different ways in which the audio narratives, which could potentially be diverse, could actually interconnect. So visually exploring these branching narratives, which look like they're diverging, but there's actually overlap in some sense. Looking at ways in which narratives can be generated through proximity, and how sound design can actually be used to enhance that sense of emotion and atmosphere. So all kind of experimentation at this stage. And looking at the photogrammetry render and how I can take this into an interactive, immersive space, the idea might be that you can explore the tree and then access different narratives through game dynamics. How could you get a view of an ant walking across the branches? What would a bird's eye view of this place look like? How would a diverse opinion look encompassed within the same site? And this leads me to where I'm up to now with the current render. I was kind of feeling like in the previous version I just showed you, there was lacking some sense of atmosphere or what I feel when I'm at the tree. So all of this I have to preface is kind of filtered through my own perspective. And I felt, how could there actually be a sense of artistry to this, an aesthetic experience in this digital environment? So we're now into Unreal Engine, looking at how I can create a sense of lighting and atmosphere, which really tells a story in itself, and how could this change throughout time? Could this change with the seasons? Could the Putukawa leaves bloom? If kind of drawing on how you can read the tree in itself. I was talking to Toy last week around how the Putukawa tree, if it's blossoming large red flowers, right, Toy, the kin is going to be good. For example, how could those kinds of ways of reading also be incorporated into here? So yeah, looking at fog, looking at atmosphere, looking at ways in which different perspectives can be filtered through an artistic lens. And this is currently, I'm up to it. It does remind me a bit too much of Counter-Strike or Call of Duty with the movement, so I'm going to slow that down a little bit. It's a bit too first-person shooter at the moment. But yeah, the idea of a physical, well, semi-physical or quasi-physical experience exploring this place, it's never going to be like the actual site. I've kind of come to terms with. It's not going to be like physically being there, but what could it be like to have an aesthetic experience where you can get a sense of the place, but it's heightened into a more spiritual or magical or a kind of storytelling space in itself. And starting to model branches is another step, which I am going to be getting into over the summer once this trip finishes. So I'm just going to wrap up now, guys, just on a minute to go for 20 minutes. So this is kind of where I'm at with my discoveries and discussion. And as I say, I'm at the really early stage of this process. I only started in July. So I really welcome your feedback and comments or any ideas you have for me. So the tree is a metaphor and site of inquiry for fostering multi-perspectivity and informing my methodology. Also, I've been starting to think, what does the tree represent to me as well? Because I can't divorce myself from this process in terms of my interpretation. So does it represent personal growth or belonging to me? The tree's multifaceted nature offers different views from every angle, and its branching growth serves as a metaphor for multi-perspectivity and storytelling in my methodological approach. It symbolises coexistence and expansion of diverse narratives in society, and offers a visual framework for multidisciplinary, multi-pronged approach that I'm taking with transmedia storytelling. Could it be applied in other settings or contexts? In terms of the representation of my construction of the tree, do I represent the whole tree realistically? How does the fact that the trunks and branches are realistic and stitched together, and the leaves and branchlets are generated using modelling techniques, create a sense of maybe friction? What is my rationale for this beyond pragmatics of photogrammetry and 3D modelling? I want to evolve my visual aesthetics more, so I want to quote unquote make it potentially more magical in some senses, more horrific in some senses, create a sense of feeling when someone experiences it, which you can't achieve when you're actually at the site itself. How can I utilise the affordances of digital and immersive design, which can never replicate the real thing? Finally, could generative AI be used in a positive way rather than causing division, diversity and polarisation? Could it be used to stitch together and find convergence of diverse narratives? And how could I employ co-design or participatory methods in the creative process? Going forward, this is going to be an ethics application, and if anyone has any experience of ethics that would like to give me some tips, that would be really helpful, yeah. So where to next? I'm going to continue experimentation, develop the prototype, confirm candidature October next year, and submit ethics for the co-design process. All of this on top of my full-time teaching in AUT, so it's going to be a busy year. I'm just going to enjoy the rest of my time in Brazil. Thank you so much for having us here. And thank you to all